Hello, everybody. My name is Ezra Pryor, and I'm here today to talk to you about research, stigma, and regulations. Oh my. I tell you a little bit about myself here. I'm the applied market specialist at Heidolph North America in their HBX unit, the Heidolph Botanical Extractions Unit. So we focus specifically on the cannabis market and how to better serve that market with premium laboratory equipment. I'm also the past chair, founder, and current development chair of the Cannabis Chemistry Subdivision at the American Chemical Society. I also would like to introduce Dr. Jahan Marcu, who, although he could not be here to help me present the material today, was instrumental in helping me put this together. He was also a co-founder of the Cannabis Chemistry Subdivision at the American Chemical Society with me so many years ago at this point. He is the editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Endocannabinoid Medicine. He is also working with the International Research Center on Cannabis and Health. And he currently serves as the historian for CANN. So, I'll start this presentation with a quote. So Amy Purdy said, if we can see past our preconceived limitations, then possibilities are endless. And Amy Purdy famously was the Paralympic athlete who had 2 prosthetic legs. And she gave this TED Talk. It was great with these oversized and, crescent-shaped prostheses, the legs. And I think it's amazing to sort of think past what we're replacing when we face limitations. So when we deal with those limitations, we can end up with advantages. And I think so that's a really good way to get this started. So we're going to be looking at the cannabis industry and where we are currently at in March of 2020, and where we see things going with the guidance and support of nonprofits and other institutions that are helping to build this industry in a very specific way. So when we're looking at the industry today, it doesn't matter what you accomplished yesterday. It's only about where you're at today, right? What's your level of compliance today? What's your level of readiness today? What's your level of agreement with other laboratories today and things like that. And I think that there are some companies that are doing research. There are some companies that are really putting in that energy, and there's others that aren't. And I think that that's going to be a significant advantage moving forward. And there are these hurdles that we're dealing with: uneven, unpredictable regulations, policy, stigma is still an issue we're dealing with, although it is quickly lifting. And we want to understand really what are the pains that the industry is facing at the moment, and how are these nonprofits addressing those issues. So here's a number of things that the industry is facing right now. So there's a lack of clear federal guidance. There's state oversight, certainly, but there are resources that are being withheld in a way when the federal government is not participating in that regulatory oversight in a lot of ways. It is in some ways, but we'll get into that. There's a lack of resources for the state regulatory oversight agencies. A lot of times they don't understand the challenge that they're trying to overcome with the actual size of the cannabis operations and the number of them in a specific state. So we're finding a lot of states are struggling to develop the resources to actually have regulatory oversight and support those facilities. There's an inconsistency with regards to methods and practices. So this is both in testing and manufacturing. When you don't have a consistent set of methods, then from from one facility to another facility, you could have significantly different results. This is particularly an issue with testing, because if you don't have a specific method that is repeated in different laboratories, the numbers might not add up. You know, you could have two different laboratories producing two different results because they're doing different methods of analysis, because there isn't a widely accepted method of analysis in every case. There's also an issue with isolations of scientists. So people can feel unconnected. I mean, when you think about, you know, plastics chemistry or something, you know, banal, if you will, you know, those scientists typically don't find any barriers to interacting with each other and with other scientists in their department or company. But with cannabis, sometimes the stigma can get in the way of that communication and that networking and that connectedness that creates opportunities for collaboration and, you know, brainstorming, things like that. So, you know, the last issue I'll bring up is inconsistent and unreliable product. So because there, again, are so many variations on method, you can find that there's a lot of inconsistency in the product. And, you know, one product is available for some amount of time and then not available, or, you know, one gummy bear is not the same as another gummy bear. So inconsistency within a batch, inconsistency between similar products, things like that are a challenge in the industry at the moment. So, you know, we're going to talk about different solutions for those specific issues. So there is some work happening with federal agencies. There are development of regulatory oversights and strategies for states to have better resources or more efficiently using their resources. There are development of standards and methods and practices. And, you know, that's going to be a really interesting thing to come back to. There are efforts to connect scientists. And lastly, there are developments of quality assurance and quality control standards. So we're going to get into those. And then again, you know, we're in an imperfect industry. You know, some laboratories, for example, are getting limited engagements because they're seeing, you know, the producers are seeing testing as an opportunity to verify the value that they've asserted or demonstrate that they have less value, right? They're not necessarily seeing it as a value added proposition, or they're just interested in testing potency. So where testing is not always mandated, it can be a real challenge for these laboratories to develop. You know, another thing that we're dealing with is this vape crisis that we've narrowly escaped. There were some, you know, bad actors in the vape cart segment of the cannabis industry, and thanks to PACs and other institutions that were doing research, publishing that research, and letting people know what really was going on. So that's, you know, was a stumbling, you know, a stumbling block. And, you know, there's limited support for research and publications. Oftentimes we find people who've done fantastic research and they're having a hard time getting it published because they're dealing with an older generation that doesn't take this particular material seriously. And so, you know, we've got publishers that are not being open-minded about the value of presenting cannabis research. So, you know, there's also a CBD credibility problem. The market was really flooded in the last few years, and so it can be difficult to, you know, separate the wheat from the chaff, right? And I think that moving forward, these CBD companies are going to have an opportunity to build that credibility or not. And in the end, those CBD companies with credibility are going to last, and the other ones are going to, you know, be a flash in the pan. And, you know, there's impending federal oversight. There seems to be this, I don't even know how to put it, right? It seems to be this looming threat of federal oversight. Eventually we're going to have to deal with the oversight of the federal government, which, on the one hand, there's tremendous resources there for support and development, and but on the other hand, it can be daunting because we don't know exactly how they're going to operate. We can look at parallel industries. We can look at similar situations. So we're not completely in the dark here, but it does seem to be a topic of conversation, and it seems to be sort of an inevitability almost, right? So there's something to think about too, is how we're overcoming this knowledge gap and some of these issues, is that there are universities that are popping up left and right with training modules for cannabis analysis, for cannabis cultivation, for extraction and things like that. So I think those are going to be a valuable resource moving forward. And I'm eager to see how those universities interact with private industry and, how they sort of synergize, right? And this is one of my favorite slides. This is the numerous nonprofits of influence. And of course, I couldn't mention all of them, but these are the 6 that I found to be most relevant in my work and in the development of the industry at this point. Of course, I've got to mention the American Chemical Society's Cannabis Chemistry Subdivision first and foremost, because that's so near and dear to my heart. But we also have the AOAC, the AOCS, ASTM International, USP, and AHP. And we're going to take a minute and look at each one of those and see what they're working on and how they overlap and things like that. So this is a nifty Venn diagram that is going to show us, who's doing what, right? So you can see ASTM is right in the center there with their finger in every pie. And we'll get into how they would manage to be so diverse in their efforts in a little bit. We have USP, who's working on quality control, identification, strength, and purity. And then we have AHP that's working on identity, quality control, and analytical methods. And then we have the AOCS and AOAC, who are both focused specifically on development of analytical methods. And then CANN is the lone wolf off to the side, working specifically on networking, professional development, mentorship, collaboration, recognition, and really bringing the people who are doing everything right to the table so that they can be heard, and enriching that talent pool for the next generation of cannabis scientists. So again, I'm going to sort of put American Chemical Society's Cannabis Chemistry Subdivision front and foremost. The American Chemical Society is the largest scientific society with 150,000 people plus worldwide, if I'm not mistaken. And right now we have 700 plus members. I'm sorry, 700 plus members. I'm going to move the decimal place there. And we're dedicated to cannabis chemistry and scientists. And so let's see, we serve the scientific community and create opportunities for collaboration. We provide a way into the industry for a lot of professionals, as well as a way up in the industry for a lot of people who are already in the cannabis industry as scientists. And there's an ACS national meeting every 6 months. We just had one canceled due to coronavirus. But typically every 6 months, we put together 2 full days of programming that are published works. And they may not have been published if it wasn't for us coming together and bringing these people to the table. And, we also make an effort to recognize scientists that are doing exceptional work with the El Soli Awards sponsored by Heidolph North America. And this is the first Cannabis Chemistry Award. So I'm really happy to be a part of that because we've made some history there. And so just a couple fun pictures of us doing some cool stuff at the American Chemical Society's Cannabis Chemistry Subdivision. Down at the bottom left, you can see the El Soli Award sponsored by Heidolph North America winners, with Dr. Mahmoud El Soli, the namesake of the award, in front and center. And then the 4 people holding plaques are the award winners for that year. And I believe that was last year, 2019. Above that, you can see Stephen Goldman, who's on the far left next to me in the bottom left picture, giving that presentation up top. In the center, you can see the parade that we held in New Orleans on the way to the networking event. We had an ACS national meeting in New Orleans, and I had the idea that, it's in New Orleans. You can have a parade for anything in New Orleans, right? So why not have a parade from the convention center to our networking event? So that was a good time. We had a band leading the way and everything. And then bottom right is one of our more typical networking events. That I believe was the Cannabis Science Conference associated networking event. So that's a really great opportunity to get scientists together and help collaborate, foster collaboration and networking and whatnot. So next I want to do one quick little success story, because really CANN is about people. And so we don't want to miss out on looking at exactly what's the effect of this. And I think this is a great opportunity. Dr. Elizabeth Wagner is a good friend of mine and a wonderful scientist who was working in petroleum and wasn't really happy with what she was doing. And I think before she knew us, she didn't know that cannabis was really a viable option. But because she came to our networking events, because she got to meet other people who had, stable and gainful employment as cannabis scientists, she was able to learn about that. And so we were able to sort of like tempt her to the dark side, right? And get her to join the cannabis industry. Now she works in a testing lab. And then I'll just read this quote off for you. And she says, I go to a lot of networking events, and CANN is always really good at making that balance between having fun and getting to know folks in a professional setting. And I love that about CANN events. So basically, because she was coming to networking events, she met the person who hired her. She moved to a new city and she called me up and she said, Ezra, how can I find a place in the cannabis industry in Boston? That's where I'm moving. And I said, well, you already know Chris Hudala at ProVerde Labs because you met at this other networking event, right? So she was able to have already met that person. I was able to make refresh that relationship with an email because I know the both of them, and that's how it works, right? So moving on, I admittedly know less about some of these other organizations because I'm not directly involved in their success, but they're very important nonetheless. So the American Association of Agricultural Chemists, the AOAC, is working specifically, as I mentioned before, on analytical methods. And this is going to be critical because they're developing these methods that people are going to use when testing cannabis. And at a certain point, we're going to have to adopt a set of methods. And as an industry, we're going to have to say, okay, if you want potency testing, it's going to be this particular test. If you want terpene content testing, it's going to have to be this specific test. And those are going to compare between laboratories because they're consistent and it's the same method. So the other component is another organization is the American Oil Chemistry Society. So again, they're working specifically on methods of analysis. And again, these are going to have to be rectified at some point. Somebody's going to have to look at these lists of standards and develop what is a specifically, an approved set of methods for the entire industry. And Cynthia Ludwig, I know her personally. She was a volunteer with CANN back before the efforts of the AOC became so significant that she had to focus on those. So another organization is the American Society of Testing and Materials. and add international to that because they want to be not just known for their work in the United States, but globally. Now, they formed a pretty significant committee. The D37 committee, of which I'm a member, has more than 100 people. So how do you stay productive with more than 100 people on a committee? Well, it's a challenge, I can tell you that. But I think a great thing that they've done is develop a number of subcommittees. So I apologize for this tiny writing here, but there's so much to share. They've got all of these subcommittees working on different components of those issues. And that's how the ASTM was able to stay in the very center of that Venn diagram where they've got their finger in every pie, right? They were able to develop subcommittees to deal with terminology, industrial hemp, security and transportation, laboratory, quality management systems, so on and so forth. So, and then on the right, you have finished standards. So these are standards that they've published, too many to write out completely because the text would be so small, you need to put a magnifying glass up to the screen to read it. Because you can see down at the bottom, those are all published standards as well. And there's so many more that are being worked on right now. So next we have the United States Pharmacopeia. So this is really an interesting organization. They had a cannabis pharmacopeia. Cannabis was included in the pharmacopeia so many years ago. I think 70 years ago is when it was excluded. And it was first mentioned in 1851. You can see that, the front cover of that U.S. Pharmacopeia edition 3 that included cannabis, right? Because that was such an important agricultural product in the United States before prohibition. Again, these guys are setting standards for identity, strength, purity, and of medicines, food ingredients, dietary supplements manufactured, distributed, and consumed worldwide. So that's their goal overall. And so you can see how cannabis falls into that goal, right? And again, we were saying that they focused specifically on identity for their work in the short term. But USP has a really interesting story. They are a government organization, so they're not the swiftest acting, perhaps, but certainly deliberate, right? So in 2015, they published a feasibility study about publishing about including cannabis in the U.S. Pharmacopeia again. And they had a forum, they had an expert panel. This is 2 years later already. And then the FDA comes in and blocks the USP publication of the in-house publication. So the U.S. Pharmacopeia is their publication, right? And the FDA basically says, look, we sign your paychecks. You can't publish that here. So the USP is then submitting that work for quality of cannabis inflorescence in a separate journal, in a separate scholarly journal. It's currently under review, so I can't share with you, unfortunately, what journal that is. I was hoping that by the time I was recording this presentation, we would have that publication out, but it's not there. Another slide I'd love to talk to you about is the American Herbal Pharmacopeia. So the American Herbal Pharmacopeia is a guidebook for dealing with specific crops and specific plants. And there was a cannabis edition of the American Herbal Pharmacopeia in 1850, originally released in 1850, and there were other editions until about 70 years ago. And then we were able to get one out. My colleague, Dr. Marcu, was instrumental in that process. And it states the standards for identity, analysis, and quality control of cannabis inflorescence or flowers. So that's a really interesting read. You can get that online. I believe it's a small download fee, but it's definitely worth it if you're looking at standards. And when we look at these specific standards, I think that they're going to be very helpful for us inferring what we might get when we have federal oversight, right? Because this document draws from parallel industries, parallel crops that are regulated federally, and tries to present similar standards. So lastly, this is a tool that you can use in a laboratory that's privately owned, or as an example, in the state of Delaware, a state agency can use this to maximize the efforts that they have and maximize the resources that they have for regulatory oversight. And to be completely transparent here, this is something that Heidolph North America sells. So I'd be happy to talk to anybody about this. And I'm going to briefly show you guys what it can do. So we've got 3 screenshots from this program. And basically it takes the regulations that a cannabis operation needs to be aware of and in compliance with, and puts it into a easy to read checklist format. That's the bottom left image. And that's your self-assessment. So you can do that on an iPad. You can go through and do the self-assessment, which otherwise would have been a pen and paper endeavor. And then automatically those results get put into a spreadsheet, which is that central image with nested information like how to address that violation, what is the regulatory citation specifically that addresses to that issue, what is the potential cost for that issue in the event of surprise inspection, who you want to assign it to, keeping track of all those issues, managing those tasks. And then lastly, there's metadata that's generated instantly where you can look at issues over time, issues by area, issues by category, things like that, issues by potential fines, and that's that multiple graph image in the top right. And so what this is going to do is when you look at states that are trying to regulate a tremendous number of cannabis facilities, this is an example of a tool that can take that one auditor that has to look at 1,000 facilities and change that paradigm significantly, because now those facilities can self-audit and report that info. Those facilities can have a record of their inspection with all that metadata generated instantly. You don't have to have somebody full-time just generating that metadata while you have other people full-time that are collecting that data, right? So it's this type of innovation that's really going to drive compliance forward, because you do have people who are self-regulating. Do have people who are, really aggressive about staying in compliance, and this is going to help them do that. It's also going to help state regulators keep up with the challenge, right? I think I don't want to throw any states under the bus specifically, but there are some states where they have 6,000 cannabis operations and 6 auditors. So how are you going to have one person inspect 1,000 facilities? It's not really possible, but if you can maximize that person's effort by giving them some technological tools, then you can, it becomes a much more manageable task. So I'd like to recap the nonprofits of influence that I mentioned previously. CANN, of course, the Cannabis Chemistry Subdivision of the American Chemical Society, is working on networking, collaboration, publications, and improving the applicant pool for the cannabis chemistry industry specifically. The ASTM is working on standards of quality, potency, identification, methods of analysis with their mega committee. The AOCS is working on methods of analysis. The AHP is working on identity, quality, and methods of analysis. The AOAC is working on methods of analysis, and the USP is working on quality, identity, and strength. So I want to take a minute to look to the future, and really so we can see what the issues we're facing today are, and we can see what the solutions that are underway are. Some of them are making a lot more progress than others, but there are these solutions, these support systems that are making their way into the industry, and self-regulation is happening. Standards are being made, right? Federal oversight is coming. It is an inevitability, in my opinion. And then international bodies will eventually also adopt some sets of standards. And it's something to think about. Many will not survive the transition to the new cannabis industry. I think we've already seen a lot of operations perish because they haven't been up with the times. They haven't been able to adapt for the changing regulations or the changing legal landscape. And I think that's going to be even more so moving forward. So bonus, we got Jahan's survival guide. So I think this is specifically about Jahan's advice for credibility in CBD companies. So, these are kind of like red flags, right? So watch out for anybody who's boasting about accomplishments that were a long time ago, anybody who's, accomplishments were like, oh, I used to bark at this particular TV show in the 80s. Now I sell CBD to kids. So, just be aware of that. We do have a source slide right here. So these are going to be all the different organizations we've talked about, including where I got that quote. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about how people can get involved with CANN, because again, it is so near and dear to my heart. We are taking applications for the El Soli Award sponsored by Heidolph North America. That is, applications are due July 1st. You can get a hold of us from that general email box on the website, which is on the flyer right there. And, we're always looking for volunteers. We are entirely volunteer-run organization. And so anybody who wants to come and build their skill set and develop a really cool group of colleagues, this is a great way to do it. It's a great networking opportunity to meet some of your cannabis colleagues this way. We are 700 plus members today, and I believe in August we'll be applying for full division status at the American Chemical Society. So jumping from subdivision to division, and it's a really exciting step because it means a permanent home at the American Chemical Society, and really we get to sort of write our own rules to some extent. So that's really exciting. And we're growing fast, 10 new members a month, doubled our membership in 2019. We're really excited to move forward here. Some of the things we might be doing in the not so distant future, creating the Journal of Cannabis Chemistry. We do a monthly webinar series, call it Journal Club. And that is free to anybody who'd like to join. And we also have a quarterly newsletter for members, and we're working on exciting things, which may be too early to mention, but so I'll hold my tongue. But you can follow us at CannDChaz on most of the social media platforms. And then also our website is cannachem.org for the time being, which I believe is going to change pretty soon, but that's what it is at the moment. So I want to thank you guys for your time today, and I hope everybody is doing well. And don't hesitate to reach out to me with questions via email, and I'll do my best to respond to you as soon as I get them. Thank you very much.